Hey, everybody, and welcome to Your Next. I'm your host, Jerome, and we went to the left coast today, the West Coast. We got a friend out in Palo Alto, California. Walter Paulsen's with me today. Walter, how are you, man?
I am doing great. We've got some chilly, rainy weather, which is what we need in California, what with all the fires. And so we need it for the fish and the farmers and the skiers. So I'm delighted to have a chilly, rainy day.
So I can't help but notice you got a bunch of hardware hanging over your right shoulder, man. What is going on?
So I'm pretty interested in health and longevity and sports competitions. So I do a bunch of things. I do Spartan races, half marathons, relays. I've run this race called the Dipsy, which is a trail race. And I don't know where to put them. And I'm drinking less wine than I used to. And so I don't have enough wine for that part of my wine rack. And I was like, oh, well, that's a handy place. And it's actually a bit of a mindset thing because it reminds me that I aspire to be the kind of person who still competes physically.
So, did you compete growing up? Those trail races, Spartan races, it's not necessarily a intercollegiate or a high school sport.
So I grew up in Fresno, California, Central Valley. It's far, it's not coastal. It's more like Oklahoma, very ag. And I was 5'10", 170 pounds, good, fast, played both ways. 5,000 people came to our games. And it was awesome. And I did track in the off season, but football was the thing. Like when I was in third or fourth grade, like I slept with my football because I wanted to be like Joe Namath. I swear to God, it's embarrassing. But then reality is, so, and I was fast, but I was like 4.6 fast, not 4.4 fast. And so I just decided to drop the mic after high school because in college, if I'd been 6'2", 195, that's a different thing, but I was not. And so, but I was still interested. And so I ran the Boston Marathon a couple times when I was in college and like that. And so so running was my thing. So I started doing running and I've done Boston, LA, New York, Chicago marathons. And I did, and far from elite, but good for like, I ran like a 2:44 marathon, which I felt good about. I was sub 3 hours and I was good. And I've just kept doing that over the years. Did a little less when I had kids. And I run with a bunch of friends and they are mostly skinnier. Like because of my football legacy, I don't know, I have a thing. So I've got like I'm more of a football player who runs as opposed to a true runner. And this one friend of mine, he's just way more talented than I am at running. And so we've probably done 50 races together. He beat me like 48 times. Like I beat him once when this is true, when he was like on chemo for cancer and he still ran. And now he's recovered. He's fully recovered. He's cancer free and he just beats me again. But I had this idea that, all right, well, what's something I can do where this upper body mass won't be just something I have to lug around? And so I discovered these obstacle course races, which are Spartan races, where you have to lift heavy stuff, throw a spear, do monkey bars. I was like, oh, that'd be really fun. So I got that same friend to go do a bunch of those. And in those, I think we've done 8 of them. We're like 50-50. Like he's one half, I've one half. And I'm like, okay, I can live with that. I guess I'm old enough I should know better. But there's still something about a race where you put on a number or you line up that you ask more of yourself. And so I still compete. My times are so much slower than I used to, but I'm just, well, I still get to do this stuff. Anyway. So that's my little sports and thing. I think it's pretty good for health and longevity to have that outlet.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time talking about resilience and building resilience and doing hard physical things, getting your heart rate up, lifting heavy things, being out of breath. Those things help with longevity versus the comfort that most people seek. And so I appreciate that. The competitive thing I've been struggling with lately because I live in a world where if I'm competing with the people around me in a lot of spaces, it deflates them, right? And
Oh,
so when it's not so much like a race, but like when I've got 2 daughters, 15
oh,
and 12, it's not fun to beat them in the Monopoly anymore or beat
yeah.
them in cards. It's like they're competitive as I was when I was that age, and just beating them over and over again isn't a whole lot of fun. But competing with myself, now that's a different conversation and being the best that you can. And so these race things, I ran my first 5K last year. I don't even really understand running a marathon, but ran a 5K last year, and there were obstacles and fitness bikes and rowers and a bunch of other stuff that really tax you, lunges with weight bags. And it wasn't quite a Spartan race and it wasn't quite a typical 5K, but it was definitely
What were they
challenging.
called? I think I've read about some of those. Do you remember what it was called?
It was called the Warrior Challenge, the
Okay.
one that I did. So
Yeah.
yeah, we actually did too. We did it in May and like September or August, but
Yeah.
it was very taxing. So I can appreciate that. But I think this is a bigger metaphor for how you lived your life. And so I like to open up these shows by asking, so you had an exit, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You say
So,
that very calmly, like it's a normal thing.
well, I've had, let's see, a number of startups as co-founder, advisor, but I've also had not exits, or I describe them as the smoldering craters of despair that I had to crawl out of and dust myself off. And there was one that turned out to be a unicorn. It was called Blackhawk Network. So if you've ever been to a grocery store and they have the whole end cap of hundreds and hundreds of gift cards, well, those didn't always exist. That was actually there was a team that created that, and I led that team that built that from an idea to a couple of hundred multi-year exclusive deals with Starbucks and Best Buy and Home Depot and so on and so forth. And that was a like 0 to 500 million in about 4 years. We had some real scale. And so, and that company ended up going public as Blackhawk Network and was taken private by Silver Lake, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 4 years ago. But it was had like a $2.8 billion valuation. And I did fine, but I didn't get like, let's go crash the Ferrari, Rich. It was comfortable, but there were so many lessons and the camaraderie of having a team working hard on something that they love to do. That was the real value. And then, oh my gosh, the mistakes I made. And it was like the power of a good idea. And even like I made mistakes, the team made mistakes, but just the idea was such a good thing that
What you talk about 4 years in that growth curve. I've only heard of that type of stuff with technology, like an app or
yeah.
SaaS. What in the world happened that got you guys that type of growth curve?
So we were we were a little startup that's incubated at a $40 billion grocer called Safeway. And believe it or not, I just come from a failed startup that had raised 13 million from Sequoia and Excel, two very blue chip companies. And I loved the team there, but we raised too much money too early. And so the engineers and product people spent, and I'll withhold names to protect the innocent, great people, but they spent a bunch of time making sure the technology was scalable without checking to see if the dogs were actually going to eat the dog food. And this was an e-commerce play. And it turned out they just built a beautiful and essentially Teflon website that we could get tons of people to come, and they just slide off and not do any business.
Oh no.
But because of the relationship with Safeway, we had some initial distribution, and we were able to get some good partnerships in place. We got partnerships with, it just shows how much retail has changed, but we got we fought a pitched battle with the candy and gum people to get racks at every checkout. This is like inside baseball for grocery stores. But then we had a rando assortment of cards. At the start, we had Nordstrom, which is still a good brand, but we had like Blockbuster, which is out of business, Borders. Those were both good retailers. Pier 1 Imports, KB Toys, which is a random toy store, and Tower Music, because music stores were still a thing. And we got enough, moved really fast, got enough out there, just got enough sales to secure the space. And we did a few million like our first Christmas. And our next year, we went from having 6 cards to like 24. And then we brought in major brands. We brought in, like I said, Gap, Home Depot, Best Buy, Starbucks. And we ended up increasing the distribution. And was our trick, was we signed multi-year exclusive deals. And so by the time Kroger and Albertsons woke up, they're like, oh, we could do one of those. Let's go do one of those. So they sent their team to do one of those. And they came back and they said, yeah, they say they have a multi-year exclusive deal in grocery for Safe with Blackhawk. And they were like, So what happened was we were able to ninja leverage that to get into every other grocer, because like lots of companies, they see something working, they want to imitate it. And so it was like the first year, second year did this, third year, And then fourth year, we had over 20,000 points of distribution and over 100 multi-year exclusive deals with kind of everybody that we were interested in, end caps in every store. And there's a lot of reach and frequency in grocery stores, and people spend a lot of money. So it was a good idea at the right time. And I was fortunate to lead a terrific team, and we sold it well and then executed. It was awesome fun.
So when you exited,
Yeah.
was there a board in place? Like, did you go from exiting it to nothing? Like, how did that process work?
So what happened was I left before Blackhawk spun out of Safeway. I was totally, even though I loved it, I was totally burned out. I had 3 daughters at the time and was commuting and traveling and whatever. And so it was tough. So it didn't actually spin out of Safeway for a couple of years. It was operating independently, but there was a bunch of machinations that we needed to do with investment bankers in order to, compensate. And Kroger had gotten warrants in the company as part of the thing. So, but yeah, so left, and then I started a company, started almost a little lifestyle company that did services for gift card related services for retailers. All the accounting is really complicated for gift cards. And so I had these 3 little daughters who I hadn't seen much for a few years. And so I spent almost 5 years actually riding my bike to Palo Alto with this little very cool idea for an accounting service that we did with like 40 major retailers that they just signed up, and we helped them deal with their gift card breakage. Like, that's super obscure, but it was a valuable thing. And yeah, so I went to that, and fortunately that did well. We ended up selling that, and then Blackhawk spun out, and so got liquid there. So those were 2 nice things. Silicon Valley is an expensive place to live. I got 3 daughters. It just didn't occur to me to not want to work.
So you get 2 liquidity events in pretty short order.
Yeah, like within a few, like a little 5 years, 4-year stretch. Yeah.
And the wire hits.
Yeah.
You're ecstatic, or it's a non-event, or you don't know what to do. I know you said don't go wreck the Ferrari, but
So I had friends with VCs and friends with people who've had a bunch of money. I had seen people who handled it well and people who didn't. And I also wasn't exactly sure on the timing of when these deals were going to come together. So when the liquidity event happened, I was actually in a startup where I loved the team and was busy doing that. So it just didn't occur to me that I would want to stop and do what? Count my money, travel. I had 3 kids in like middle and elementary school. So what am I going to go surf somewhere? What am I going to do? I don't know. For me, there's coaching and advising companies now, advising CEOs. I get a lot of satisfaction from that. But being on a team, working on a meaningful problem with teams you love and trust, like there's just kind of nothing better in adult life for me outside of the personal sphere. So it was a non-event. It was like, whoa, I haven't seen those numbers before. And then you allocate it to some different things. And then you just, at least for me, and then I just went about my day. But it was nice to have some security. And I don't know, I bought some nice clothes, and I think I updated my car. I think I got like a newer Subaru or something.
a newer Subaru that matches the running stuff I got. It's hard for me to put together a unicorn exit and a Subaru with another startup and all of the things. And the numbers don't really matter except for the security piece. And I know most people are hoping to be work optional once their exit happens. And so the thing that I think is important to talk about, because you've got the luxury of having your own experience, having the experience of your friends, seeing them, observing them go through it, and then you actually helped other people exit as well through your coaching and advising business, which we'll dig into a little bit later. So what do you tell the person who's, I don't know, 45, wants to be work optional because they got the liquidity event and they think that the money is going to solve the problem?
Well, this has actually been something. So I'm a Vistage chair, so run CEO groups. And that Vistage community has been between the folks I know in Silicon Valley have gotten Liquid and the Vistage chair community. So that Vistage tends to be what I call EBITDA companies. So companies from like 5 to 100 million in revenue, but people, a lot of them exit to private equity. And we really spend a lot of time saying, it's like, okay, first, there's a couple things of like flavors of, do you have enough? It's like, well, do you have enough money first? Because people, it's almost like university endowments, they need more than they think in order to live the lifestyle that they want. It's like, hey, I have $6 million. It's like, yeah, but if you want to travel in a certain style and do stuff and have a vacation house and whatever it is, it's not like that's going to last forever. But the harder, more nuanced question is, do you have enough to do? Do you have purpose? Because people without purpose are just unhappy. And I would say some of the most unfulfilled people I know are the ones with the most money and the most spectacular toys,
Why is that?
because they're operating from a flawed assumption about the source of happiness and satisfaction. They think it comes from having better material things. And let's be clear, nice things are awesome, but particularly nice places, right? Like if you want to go to the Wailea Beach villas at the right time of year, it's going to, around Christmas week, it's going to set you back 50 to 100 grand anyway, right? And some really nice things are just super expensive. But the relationships with people and purposeful work, if you don't have those, then the fact that you've got a couple $1,000 suit and a $200,000 car, it just doesn't really move the needle. And the truth is, happiness is two things. One, it's not a permanent state. It's not a permanent state for anybody. It's a state that you go in and out of in waves. You just have to get some acceptance of that. And the other thing is, it's not something you can shoot for. It's a byproduct of living with purpose.
It's a byproduct of living with purpose. And so, do you believe that people confuse the money and the purpose because they're working or trading their time for money conceptually, and they don't realize like the fulfillment or the joy they get is from the actual work and not the money that arrives at the end of the work?
Yeah, right. More security is better than less, for sure, right? Not being able to pay the mortgage, not being able to afford nice things and experience for your kids. That's like, there's some things that you want to do. But after a pretty modest level, more money doesn't really doesn't, increment happiness very much. But there's no upper limit on living with purpose. Here's an actual thing. So one of my good friends is a major Midas list venture capitalist. So he's worth 300 million, 400 million, a whole bunch of millions. And his thing is houses. He like drives like mid 1970s cars. It's been tricked out, but he's like deliberate that he doesn't want the latest. But he was talking, I was asking him about how we did trail running. And I was asking him how it was going. He's like, well, I felt like I didn't do that much in 2024. It's like, this was January, he says, but things are looking more interesting. And he said, then he was talking about a friend of his teaches a class at Stanford about picking the right problem to solve. And that's a really important factor to having purpose, that if like you pick the right problem to solve, and then you can assemble the resources and the teams, then that's, I think, but it's frustrating when you're trying to figure out what the right problem to solve is, because it feels like you're not making progress. And we have such an emphasis on, let's move fast. Let's answer more Slack messages. If we're just in constant motion, it must mean that we're productive and valuable. And that's actually not true. And that's a much easier kind of work than trying to be deliberate and think about, is this a good problem to be working on and solving? That's something that I'm trying to help people with more. Is this the right problem for you to be working on? And then do you have the right resources to attack it?
So, man, this is good because we help founders figure out, or at least we think we do, we help founders figure out what the problem is and who the people are that have that problem.
Mhm.
And then we'll even offer to them what we think they can make in our
Yeah.
next intensive. The thing that I'm very curious about, because this is the first time I've heard that somebody else is actually working on the problem to solve,
Yeah.
is how do you know when it's right? I know what we look for, but how do you know when it's right?
Ooh, Well, that's a great question. And there's been a lot of writers who have done sort of interesting things. And I'll mention two who I particularly think are quite thoughtful. One's Annie Duke, and she wrote Thinking in
Bets.
Bed.
Yeah.
And one of her things is to just think about your relationships and your time and your job and everything. You're making bets on expected future value and expected future value outcomes. And one of her things, and I think she's right, is well, you want to make small bets. And even if if a bet doesn't turn out, well, it's like you're sitting at the blackjack table. It's like, oh, I lost that money, but I got more information about what's left in the deck. Right. And so small bets that don't work out can actually be really valuable because they'll give you an understanding of where you don't want to go and where you want to place a bigger bet. And so that's one rubric that, that I encourage people. And even in selling, because a lot of selling is mindset. You'll have people of when somebody says no, it's like, look, it's a great thing that person told you to no, because you need to get X number of no's to get to the yes. So you're swinging the bat at trying to sell something. So you should be excited that you got a no, which freaks people out a little bit because you celebrate the successes, but you want to really celebrate the swings. You took a good swing. And then the other one is a little contrarian, is Angela Duckworth wrote
Grit.
Grit.
Yeah.
And she just spoke at the Vistage annual chair conference, and she's fantastic about how important grit is. But I think one of the things that people miss is that you need to have grit when you're working on the right problem. And that what a lot of people do, and I think in some ways, Silicon Valley and founders can over-index on grit because they're like, I'm just going to keep working on this until it turns out. And if you're working on the wrong problem, you can be fantastic and it's still not going to matter. Whereas I would say when we built the gift card model, Black Hat, we probably executed about a B plus level, but it was such a good idea and we got momentum and it was smart people. And I love that. But we picked a good problem to solve, and good problems are in some ways forgiving. So you have to have grit, but you also need to have perspective of, oh, yeah, I need some new cards. I need to try something. So you don't want to just be so stubborn that you beat your head against a brick wall, but you don't want to be flighty and just give up at the first obstacles. So there's some Goldilocks zone that you got to find, which evolves during your career. And that's the tapestry that we all weave of our own lives and trying to figure out how do we make this something beautiful and meaningful.
So the thing that I'm really curious about now is, does financial reward determine if the problem is right or not?
Well, it depends. For some people who go into investment banking and hedge funds and certain kinds of things, it's mostly just the financial reward, right? It's just,
That's why they crashed the Ferrari.
yeah. And I don't want to bash those people, but there's certain things where it's just about making money. And let's be clear, I've had some really meaningful, great experiences working on plastic cards with a mag stripe and a code and a brand on them, which and before I did that, I would not have thought it was interesting, but I think the right circumstances can make a lot of problems interesting. And so I don't know, but I think long term, if you're just in it for the money, then you make a lot of money. It can feel empty, right?
Well, I don't think it's empty. Everybody that I watch, it's really empty. And then they get out of that and they start experiencing the exit paradox, right? So you build a thing, you experience the liquidity event, you think that the money is going to solve all the stuff, and you got nothing. You don't have your title as the leader or the founder anymore. You might have got a divorce, you might have ruined the relationship with kids, you probably lost your best friend. The 3 people that you talk to the most that's in your 5 are from work. You don't spend time with them on a daily basis anymore. You go to the next level and the work that you were doing is gone. You go to the next level and you probably got fat, as you mentioned earlier. Like you did something bad to your health because you were trying to numb the stress. You go to the next level, you got money, and depending on your relationship with money, you either don't want to spend any of it because you're scared it's going to run out, or you spend all of it because you don't think you're supposed to have it. And then you're left at the top where you're trying to figure out because you don't have it. Like you realize really quickly that you mattered because of the role that you were in, not because of who you were. And now that all that's gone and you traded it in for money, you got to figure out why you're valuable and how you make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's some, some pretty elite schools, Stanford, Northwestern, Harvard. They all have versions of like second act things. Like Stanford has the Distinguished Career Institute, where it's people who've made, and I've had a number of friends go this way, where they made their number and they're in their 40s or 50s, and they're kind of, oh, well, what am I going to do next? And so they spend a couple of years, the program with a cohort, kind of figuring out what's their next act going to be. And they're really nice people, but it's a different kind of issue. It's that class about what's the problem I want to apply myself to, because if I don't have meaningful work, then just giving away my money or turning my tens of millions or hundreds of millions into billions or billions into more billions, whatever, is not that satisfying for most
And it's
people.
honestly not that interesting. Like adding more zeros, it's just zeros. Like it's not interesting. And the way that I've really enjoyed describing it lately is because I believe money's a tool. Like how
Yeah.
many tools are you going to put in the shed?
Yeah. Yeah, right. And I don't say there's people like love him or hate him. I think Bill Gates has tried to figure out how, with his foundation, how can he actually have meaning and purpose with all his money? And I'll give him credit, not to bash people on sports teams, but if you think about like that's like the ultimate. A guy I know a little bit owns an NBA franchise. I'll just say, or is like majority owner of an NBA franchise. And this guy, brilliant immigrant, degrees from MIT, built multi-billion-dollar company. Like he's got stuff. And if you listen to the press, people think he's a really crappy owner. And right. And how frustrating is that to have like major number and then like, okay, well, a big boat and a vacation place and fancy cars isn't enough. What's the bigger toy? Okay, but you got to think like NBA, Major League Baseball, NFL. Okay, those are some snazzy toys. For like you're really in the big boys club if you got one of those. And then if you're like your team's not very good, people like make fun of you on social media, and you're a billionaire. It's like
And you've done nothing. Like they make it as if you didn't do something really special to get there.
well, right, and like and this guy, he built like a company that's legit and provided great lives for like thousands of families and did solve meaningful problems for millions of customers. He did all that, and now what he gets hit with is, oh, you traded away our star, and the team has no spirit, and you're a crappy owner, and you should sell. Please sell because you're so terrible at this. And it's just like, yeah,
Over
I
a
mean,
game, right?
and like, what an unsatisfying way to spend your money is to be pilloried with a team that's not performing well, and the skills that you have don't seem to enable you to make it any better. I would, not that my exits were of that stage, but I wouldn't make owning a pro sports franchise be the key to your mental wellness, because even if you're good at it, like, right, things go in cycles.
So what's really fascinating about what you just offered, and you just glazed over it. You mentioned somebody trying to figure out how to do good with their money. And
Yeah.
so in our framework, we call it proceeds invested for a lasting legacy. It's the final exit. There's usually some endowed foundation so that they don't have to go out and raise money in order for the thing to work. And in some situations, they go raise money because raising more money allows them to do more stuff. But at core, like base operations are covered. And I think it is really interesting to find that a lot of people who made big numbers, right? We're talking centimillionaires and billionaires or
Yeah.
multi-billionaires. They're trying to figure out how to give it away. And everybody that I spend time with who's given at a significant level, they always say it's more gratifying to give it away, to make somebody else's life better. They get more joy from it. They get fulfillment from it. And what I watch so often is people just want to go in and figure out how to get more.
Yeah.
And the more, to a point that you made earlier in the conversation, doesn't ever really get satisfied. We just adapt and then we consume and we don't ever really become satisfied. So you found fulfillment in the second act in a
Mhm.
way that I don't think you expected. So can we talk a little bit about your transition into more of an advisory role instead of the builder, and why that has been fulfilling for you?
Yeah, that's so I'd had some bigger exits, some failures, and then, right around the time of COVID, I had a tech company that was agricultural technology for nutrient control systems for indoor farming. I had a partner, and we just missed the product market fit. We raised some friends and family money, got a number of customers, and we thought things were going to go in a certain way, and they just didn't. And then the two industries that people have lost a ton of money in is cannabis and ag tech. They've just both been, people thought they were going to be paved with gold, and they have not been. And so I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And Vistage reaches out to people who've been owners with exits every so often. And they've been calling me for a couple of years. And I was like, no, I want to start another company. And then I shut this one down. And the guy had been my technical co-founder a couple times, so I really adored. He was going through a personal life crisis. So he had some things that he couldn't do. And I was like, well, do I want to go back in and help, let's just say, a 20 or 30 something founder who's going to be pivoting? And I was like, oh, I don't want to do that again. Right. I was just like, I just didn't want to do it again. And so Vistage gave me some insights into how I could have a different role, right, it's a funny metaphor, but literally go from being on the field to being a coach. And it came from one of my startups. I had this fabulous employee who was part of the core team. She was great. And she had mentioned at a certain point that her dad was a CEO coach. And we were building this company. And so I didn't think about it. And then I called her back. I said, hey, Al, what's your dad do? And he says, oh, he's a Vistage chair. It's like, oh, can I talk to him? Because I was like trying to figure out like an in to do my back channel thing. I talked to him, and he'd been like CFO of a private company, then CEO, and he'd been a member of Vistage, and they sold to private equity. So he had his number, and he was like, well, what am I going to do? And so he became a Vistage chair. And I was like, well, tell me what it's like. And he said, well, and he's in his early 70s. He said, he's been a Vistage chair for about 10 years. I'm not going to make this a Vistage commercial. It's just how I ended up on this path. And he said, I got to be honest with you, it's the most satisfying work I've ever done. It's like I make a meaningful difference to my CEOs and the people I coach. Their companies are better. All their employees and their employees' families are happier and more secure. And he said, when I get to spend a week a month in Florida, he lives in Chicago, so I spend a week a month in Florida. It's like, yeah, they're going to take me out of here in a box. That's a pretty good endorsement. And so, yeah, so it's really satisfying work. And the thing I like, or one thing I like, is it's a new thing. Like I know how to be an operator. Like I know how to be a founder and an operator, but to be an advisor where you have to spend more time listening and you're just like holding up a mirror to try to help the CEO recognize things they can't find on their own. That's really high level thinking. I don't want to make myself sound all grand, but in order to do that, because it's different with every CEO, it's different depending on what's going on at their company. What worked when that CEO's company was 5 million might not work well at all when it's at 50. And like I have one CEO, I'm coaching actually both founders now, and started talking with them. And it was just like two guys with an idea, technology platform thing, and they had $1,000 a month in revenue, and they couldn't afford it. But I gave them some advice, gave them some introductions, and so now I think they just had, and they're like 15 people now, and they've raised a couple $1,000,000, and they're at about a $5 million run rate. And so, right. But the skills that made them really good when it was a couple of guys and they started this company out of their like frat house thing, or now it's like, oh, well, how do you create a great culture and how do you recruit people to build it? So it's a really interesting thing. One thing in addition to just helping people sell more, because everybody leads that, I'm really trying to help. I spend a lot of time trying to help CEOs build great cultures. And that's just such an interesting problem because it's got to reflect the founding team and the CEO and the industry. But there's some like consistent threads that companies with great cultures have. And so trying to communicate that, yeah, it seems like it's extra work now, but it brings such a spirit to a company if you have a winning culture. And if you have a crappy culture, even if you're in a great market, boy, it's going to be hard to win long term.
Culture eats strategy for breakfast.
There you go, man. There you go. I agree 100%, Jerome.
So, all right, I guess we got to land this plane because I think I could talk to you for hours. Maybe I have to get in a trail running so I can get some
Yeah, we can
trucking
do a
running.
hike.
Running and talking is not my forte. So, there's two questions I like to wrap up with. And the first one is, who else should be on the podcast? I mean, you spent a lot of time with a lot of different founders. The guy teaching a class on solving the right problem sounded fascinating, but if you had to pick one founder, who would you say is the right guest to be on your next?
Oh, that's a great question. Let me ponder that a little bit. There's a friend of mine, Paulsen Avakian, is working on a new business idea. And does it have to be a founder? Because let me think. I have some friends who've had some good fintech exits who are and here's the thing. And they've had small company, but they've also worked at like Visa and American Express. And there's some real skills about being able to operate at that stage. And also, and there's a guy, a friend of mine who was at the startup that raised too much money, but he went on to a very successful career leading product and technology. And I'll give him a plug. His name's Nikhil Singhal. And he does coaching, and he's very interested in kind of the winning cultures of technology companies and what are the attributes that people need to succeed. And he and I look at it a little bit differently. Like, he's pretty pro big tech. He spent last 5 years at Meta in a senior executive role. And I'm a little more skeptical, but yeah, but Nikhil's, he's, as they say, wicked smart. And he's seen big tech from the inside and has a really informed point of view. So those are a couple.
I love it. I love it. And then the final question I love wrapping these up with is, what's the one thing you want the listeners to take away? We've covered a ton of ground today. And if they just had one thought from you to take with them, what would it be?
It's important to love your work. And it's important to love your work. If you don't, and you don't have to love all of it, but you gotta at least have some aspect where you're really excited. And this guy, Marcus Buckingham, has done some research. He wrote a book called Love and Work. And that if you love at least 20% of your job, you can probably really do pretty well at it. And because it's all about being a 5-star performer in your thing. And if you don't love what you do and love your team, then you're going to mail it in and it won't be great and it won't be satisfying for you. And so it's really worth, and it doesn't necessarily matter. You can have a lot of flexibility at where you start, but the highest performing people at the highest performing companies, they love what they do. They love their team. They love their job. They love their company. And I think that's something that everybody should strive for.
Walter, this has been phenomenal, man. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with the listeners. They're so fortunate to get to hear from you. It's funny you mentioned that the guys couldn't afford the advice or the guidance, and to think that they got to hear from you for a little bit of time today. It's probably advice or guidance that some of them can't afford, but it'll be helpful for them on their journey. So thank you so much.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Jerome.
To my listeners, your dreams should be real. We'll catch you on the next episode.